This video is going to be about why the state should never absolutely control the education system. Forgive me if I screw up anywhere. This is my first time doing this. To begin, I believe it is important to address the common reasons why people believe the state is essential in being fully involved with the education system. So 1, to make sure equal educational opportunity is available to everyone. 2, to force parents who might otherwise neglect their children's education. 3, to make education affordable for everyone. 4, to ensure the preservation of democracy. And 5, to help create a common social fabric where all are respected and accepted. Now, these are great ideas, and it is certainly true that many of our founders and promoters of government schooling had these thoughts in mind as they petitioned legislators to pass compulsion laws and to levy taxes to support the new method of education. Horace Mann, often referred to as the father of public education, and others had a dream, and they had no qualms about using force to impose their vision of the future on a largely unsuspecting populace. What most don't know is specifically what this new dream entailed. Yes, the reformers wanted all children to be educated to a point, but only to the point of being useful as citizens and servants of the government and industry, not to the point of becoming too independent to control. Here it is in some of their own words. Our schools have been scientifically designed to prevent overeducation from happening. The average American should be content with their humble role in life. This was said by William T. Harris, the U.S. Commissioner of Education. The children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society which is coming, where everyone would be interdependent. Every teacher should realize he is a social servant set apart for the maintenance of the proper social order. In this way, the teacher always is the prophet of the true God and the usherer in of the true kingdom of God. This was said by John Dewey, a philosopher and educational reformer. Only a system of state-controlled schools can be free to teach whatever the welfare of the state may demand. Said by Elwood P. Cubberley, Dean of Stanford University School of Education. Parent choice proceeds from the belief that the purpose of education is to provide individuals with an education. In fact, educating the individual is but a means to the true end of education, which is to create a viable social order to which individuals contribute and by which they are sustained. This was said by the Association of California School Administrators. We who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents having given hostage to our cause, said by Horace Mann, educational reformer and abolitionist. And this is just a small sample of hundreds of similar sentiments from educational founders and reformers. But maybe Horace Mann said it best when he believed his cause was sacred, and for that reason, he felt he had the right to force people to sign on. Not all parents handed their children over willingly. Many actually refused to comply with the compulsory attendance laws and found themselves at the sharp end of state militia bayonets. Horace Mann's dream had come true. The state would now enforce his plans for the future of all citizens. But the dream has turned into a nightmare for families and societies. Even Mann might be shocked at the results for his win of the compulsory state schooling. When push comes to shove, people don't take force very well. They don't buy the idea that one man or a small group of men can know what's best for everyone, and they certainly don't believe that they have the right to use policing powers of the state to force their views on others. But while people are busy working and living and supporting the state, while you're busy creating a successful economy and providing their income, legislators and reformers are often busy working against the people. By the time the citizens realize what's happened to our society, it's too late. The shock of finding themselves at the mercy of the state can take a while to subside. And by then the state has dug in its heels, and reversing the destitute state of liberty is not so easy. Essentially, because people are so busy with life, they often do not have the time or the resources to fight back. That is, until they just can't take it anymore. And perhaps Thomas Jefferson said it best in the Declaration of Independence. All experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms of which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such a government. Now, Jefferson was, of course, referring to the British, but the point still stands. If people begin to be fed up by the narrative enforced by our education system, they will revolt, and not necessarily in a violent way either. In Canada, as of 2016, 424,000 students have been enrolled in private school education, which is about 8% of the total student number, and this number is continually climbing. However, the question remains, why should the state never control education? Well, here's a list of 10 reasons why. 1. The government does not have the right to force one group of people's ideologies on others. This is probably the least controversial point in the list. However, it remains the most overlooked. The government consistently spews its narrative at children in schools, and if you hold opposing beliefs, you are either marked wrong or made to conform. 2. History shows that almost all people with power will abuse that power. The exceptions are few. Our children should not be captives to the police power of the state. Are we really naive enough to ignore the fact that the government only teaches us what they want taught? 3. Government education undermines the strengths of families by implying or even teaching that independent sources are backwards and unenlightened. In other words, the teacher knows best, which really means the state knows best, and by discrediting sources immediately, like WikiLeaks or PragerU per se, without further inquisition, is just plain ignorance. 4. In an effort to create equality, and because of its unwieldy bureaucratic nature, government schooling reduces most children to a lowest common denominator, denying kids true opportunities to soar. This point speaks for itself and needn't be further explanations if you take this into consideration with your school experience. 5. It teaches children not to trust themselves and to completely trust and be obedient to authorities. Kids are tested, graded, judged, held back, allowed to pass, all based on decisions of school authorities. Children learn that above all else, they cannot know anything until they are taught or until they are told that they are right or wrong by a group of mostly partisan educators, if you can even call them that. 6. Students are routinely taught or led to believe things that the state wishes them to believe and are not taught other points of view. For instance, students are taught that paying more taxes is good, and that people who object to supporting schools or the needy through taxation are greedy and uncaring. Anything that goes against conformist thought is completely off the table in a school environment. They are taught that it is important for people to trust the government, and while the government should certainly work for that trust, that doesn't relieve people of the duty to trust, even when the government falls short. 7. Students are never taught what may be the most important lesson that the Founding Fathers tried to impress upon us: posterity. No one, absolutely no one, that uses the policing powers of the state to back or reinforce their ideologies can be trusted. Government may be a necessary evil, but no government is to be trusted. Government must be watched and kept under control at all times with eternal vigilance. Power corrupts, authority will be abused, and none should take whatever the state spews at them to be 100% fact. 8. Schools backed by the power of the state have no need to answer to parents, nor do they have any intention to do so. There is very little accountability on a local scale. They may make small and usually temporary concessions to community mores, but they know that in the end they can do as they wish, regardless of the desires of the parents or community. 9. State schools become tools for special interest groups who wish to target children with their message. Parents would be shocked to know that schools allow many special interest groups access to their children in a variety of ways, ranging from allowing psychologists to conduct studies on kids, to allowing groups to do social programs in school, which often reinforce whichever mind-nulling narrative the state is choosing to go with, irrespective of dissenting views. Parents have virtually no say in these matters. 10. Schools make superficial changes from time to time, aka they'll abolish tests, a different curriculum, a new grading system, but nothing changes about the most important aspects of government schooling. It is coercive. It serves the ends of the government and those who find ways to use the government. It undermines the family, morality, and liberty. It robs the vulnerable young of their independence of spirit and thought, replacing it with trust in the government and fear of retribution for disobeying the government. Now, this next point may be anecdotal, but I believe there are many people who may have shared the same public school experience. Why is it that in public school, we are only ever taught to follow what they deem settled principles? How come we are never taught dissenting opinions, so that with a whole bunch of differing views, we are then able to establish our own opinions after analyzing all of the arguments? Why on a history test am I asked to explain a historical figure's motive, but there only being one correct answer? You see, subjects like history, philosophy, etc. don't normally have one correct answer. Answers in these areas are often just perspectives, if nothing else. But I guarantee if I wrote something like, the British colonization of Native Americans was a necessary evil in advancing them socially, I guarantee that would be marked immediately wrong. However, regardless of whether you agree with that assertion or not, it should still be presented as a plausible theory. This type of evaluating demonstrates how intrinsically partisan our education system is. So much of the dialectic process has been removed from us socially that you have an overwhelming number of people who silence others in the name of acceptance, love, diversity, etc. They say everyone's opinions matter, but in turn silence yours. And all of this redundant legislation, these regressive principles, are being installed to limit differing views, all because of our education system. It is the cause of many, many issues in our society, because if a democratic society has a majority that are being taught one set of beliefs, what principles do you think are going to get voted in? And the politicians don't care. They just want to get elected. And the ones that do hardly stand a chance. Any opposition are silenced because most are afraid of being socially ostracized by their peers, and you get a very, very small percentage who continues to speak out. And what happens to them? They get called Nazis, xenophobes, racists, extremists, and any other term that they've newly defined to fit their narrative. This would all change if people just self-educated. Instead of taking what you learn in school to be truth, open a goddamn book, read the arguments of intellectual thinkers across history, and from there, establish your perspective. To do any less, yet continue to silence the voice of others, is to do a great disservice to yourself and your fellow man, because for you to come around with a status perpetuated idea of how the world should work and diminish the very same type of academic freedom that Western society was built on is to be ignorant and backwards thinking. I don't care if after you self-educate, you hold the same opinions as earlier. The point being is that steps should never be skipped. So in conclusion, what does the state really teach children? 1. Truth comes from authority. 2. Intelligence is the ability to memorize and repeat. 3. Accurate memory and repetition are rewarded. 4. Non-compliance is punished. And 5. You must conform, intellectually and socially. But what is the solution, you ask? The solution is self-education. The solution is opening a book or watching a documentary that discusses different views. As a people, we must take it upon ourselves to teach what the government refuses to teach us, and thereby draw our own conclusions from the arguments presented. I refuse to believe a person is intelligent from the amount of degrees they have hanging on their walls. Having a piece of paper doesn't show me you're enlightened, but rather being able to hold your own in a discussion without throwing out ad hominems and other logical fallacies does. But this is all I have to say on the matter, so thank you for listening.